Welcome, everybody, to episode 326 of WordPress Weekly for Wednesday, August 8th, 2018. I'm your host, Jeff Chandler, joined by Mr. John James Jacoby, sir.
Hello,
How are
sir.
you doing? How are you doing this week,
Great.
sir?
Pretty good. We broke ground on a house this week.
Nice.
So we have officially started the construction process, which is terrifying and exciting. And there's all sorts of cool stuff going on in little old East Troy that's exciting. Everything's pretty good so far. The weather is shining. The sun is shining. The weather is beautiful. The birds are singing.
No, you know what I found out this past weekend?
What did you find out this past weekend?
Mushrooms that grow in a yard are toxic to dogs.
That is true. Many of them can be. Many things can be
So
toxic.
Smokey, being the puppy that he is, we believe he ate a mushroom, and within 20 minutes of eating the mushroom, he is crapping uncontrollably.
Oh,
it's liquid.
okay.
He's got foam bubbles at the mouth. So I said, you know what? Okay, I better take him into the emergency hospital. So, he emptied out his gastrointestinal tract. I know this is maybe gross sounding to our listeners, but he emptied himself out. This is the life of owning a puppy.
We've made it 90 seconds into the show, and
everybody's already tuned out.
That's right. So at least
poor Scott. No one's going to be here to listen to him. But it turns out that whatever happened, they gave him some charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
He ate it up. Now he's fine. Got the blood work the other day. Smokey is A-okay. But
good.
There's a lot of dogs out there that they're walking, they're outside to eat a mushroom. Next thing you know, they're dead. I mean, that's just the way it goes, because there's a lot of toxins and different kinds of mushrooms. So, word to the wise out there. This is our TIL moment. Do not let your animals eat mushrooms.
That's right. That's right. Lots of things are toxic to dogs that you wouldn't think are. Lots of regular vegetables.
Too much pork is a bad thing.
Yeah. So that's a scary thing, but I'm happy Smokey's okay. Smokey's a trooper. He's been through a lot already, so he's a good little dude.
That's right. So today we have a great show lined up for you. I've been looking forward to this since, I'd say, for about 2 weeks. That's when we published the article. A little bit of interview on WP Timer with Scott Kingsley Clark, and he's here to join us today to talk about the Fields API project. And for those who don't know, I just learned this. Scott has been on WordPress Weekly for 7 times now, since back when the show started. It was episode 63 back in 2009. And throughout the years he's been on the show, today marks his 7th time. So, of course, he's officially a friend of the show now.
Of course.
After the 3rd time he's a friend of the show. Now he's like double a super friend of the show.
Super friend of the show. After Gary, Scott will be the next co-host. After me and after Gary.
It's quite possible. And for those who don't know, Scott Kingsley Clark is a software as a service lead developer at Modern Tribe. He's the lead developer of the Pods framework, and he develops a number of other WordPress plugins. And you might see him around attending and presenting at WordCamps, meetups, and conferences, sharing his experiences. And he also plays the baritone ukulele in his music project, Soft Charisma. And if we're lucky, he might give us a little musical treat here before he exits the show.
Wow, no pressure or anything, but Jeff is asking you to serenade everyone before the show is over.
He gave me about 10 minutes to prepare, so I have a few songs lined up to figure out. I have to decide near the end what I'm going to do.
I actually love the sound of the ukulele. It's cool.
Me too.
So Scott, thanks a lot for being on the show. I guess let's start off in the very beginning here. But let's talk a little bit about the Fields API. Let's talk about what it is, or what it was before it was named the Fields API project, and in layman's terms, what was its purpose, or what is its purpose?
Sure. So WordPress has a couple of deficiencies many of us developers are aware of, one of which is the ability to make it easy to add custom fields to the post screen. You're editing a post and you want to add custom fields for your plugin. You maybe have a meta box you want to have there, and then you want to have some custom fields show up there with some inputs and all sorts of different types of inputs. And you get to that point and you realize, well, there's nothing inside of WordPress to help me do this other than to make the meta box. So that is kind of where a bunch of people started to create all these different plugins that let you create new custom fields. There's hundreds of plugins on WordPress.org right now that do some sort of approach to create their own meta box fields and stuff for post screen, and it's they've built their own solutions, either hard coding it or creating their own little mini framework that they use. And so just a bunch of people have been griping about it for a long time. And a few years back, we sort of said, hey, can we do anything as part of WordPress core to do this and push it along? We all know it's a problem. And Eric Andrew Lewis and me and a few other people got together and said, okay, let's see what we can come up with. And so that was the metadata project. We kind of coined Metamorphosis for a pun name. And the idea was, let's see if we can make an API to add these sorts of fields to the screens like the post editor. And then we started thinking, hey, what about the other screens? There's a lot of overlap here. There's the user editor, there's the common editor, there's now terms have meta. So there's all sorts of places we could add things to different forms. And that kind of, it's been snowballing into a bigger scoped project. But the goal has been to create an API that lets you register architecture for your WordPress site, defining fields and where they go for the different types of content, whether it's a post type, a taxonomy, a user, comments, all sorts of different things.
And I've heard this API described as working with the data layer of WordPress, essentially the foundation of WordPress. Is that right?
Yeah. So where you have your fields getting stored in the post meta table or term meta or wherever else, that's the storage process. And what the Fields API would do would create an API where you can register as a plugin developer. You could register your different fields for your different content types, and they would automatically appear in the screen. And they would also automatically handle the saving process and all the other things that you would have to do manually yourself as a plugin developer. So it would kind of handle all of the most common use cases for a handful of common field types, like a text field or a text area or a file uploader. So we would cover a few of those different things as part of the initial offering.
So back in 2014, you sort of took over the primary lead role for the Metadata UI project, and a year later, the project was reborn as the Fields API project. And let's see, it's 2018 now, and the Fields API is not in core, and there's a lot of things that happened between then and now. So let's start off with back in 2015, when I would imagine we're in the midst of high interest level, high engagement, high activity, high contributions, and sort of latest on the road of between then and now where the project is seeking new leadership.
Yeah, so when I took over, it was essentially because Eric Andrew Lewis, he had some other things he wanted to do, and I said, "Hey, I can handle this, so you can focus on those other areas of core." I think that was attractive to him, and this is probably an early indicator because I think he found other areas he could make a difference in, smaller scoped areas. For instance, some other metadata functions that are more about some REST API stuff, and there's all sorts of areas he's been working on. But the whole process of building this whole API was involving a lot of different people and a lot of different input. We did a series of rounds of going through each individual major popular plugin that builds custom fields for WordPress. Advanced custom fields, types, all sort like pods, CMB2, all these different solutions, and looking at how they're approaching their problems. And during this process, we got some more input and a lot more interest. And one of the places that gave a lot of power was 10up and Web Dev Studios. I was working at Web Dev Studios back in 2013, 14 or so. And they were like, hey, yeah, we want to help WordPress core. How can we help you help WordPress? And I said, I'm pitching you this Fields API idea. I think this is going to be a really big thing. not just because it would make our lives easier, but because I think we have a lot of the skill set that could make this actually happen. So they gave me some time to work on it. I can't remember the exact amount, but it must have been 50 to 100 hours of time as part of my work. And over a period of months, I worked on it and kept making it, making different changes to the architecture and making it better and better. And then at some point, I had some stuff going on where I was at Web Dev Studios and I wanted to switch to 10up because I saw some new challenges at 10up that were very interesting to me. So I made that switch, but at the same time, 10up said they would be interested in helping me continue my work. Mm-hmm. So I got 10up to spend additional time and effort. They gave me over 100 hours of time development. They gave me some resources. One of our project managers was helping kind of organize some things. Mm-hmm. We had a few of my team members on my team that I was working on. They contributed some pieces to the Fields API too. Mm-hmm. Really cool setup. I thought it was going to give us a success, especially because at 10up we had well, not we anymore, but past tense, we had Helen, which is a major contributor to WordPress, a powerhouse of thought and design and UX. And I was like, hey, Helen has some ideas here to redo the user profile screen and all sorts of other areas of WordPress. And Fields API would go hand in hand with that because it would make it possible so that we could implement the API and implement any UI we want on top of the API. Mm-hmm. So like future things, whereas we see now Gutenberg, could be done much more easily. There would be less headaches and backward compatibility concerns. There wouldn't be as much of a problem trying to retrofit so much stuff.
Mm-hmm. So that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, you brought up Gutenberg, and I talked to Justin Taylor the other day, and I asked him what his thoughts were on Gutenberg, and he agreed. And there's a handful of other people that agree as well that it would have been. They believe it would have been a lot nicer, maybe a lot easier for transitioning into Gutenberg if a Fields API came first. Mm-hmm. And as you just alluded to, there's been so much work and effort in Gutenberg to get MetaBox backwards compatibility with MetaBoxes and custom field support, with advanced custom fields, because a lot of sites and people rely on those plugins and those fields. So if a Fields API came first, would that have sort of eliminated or alleviated all of those concerns and would have allowed not so much time and energy to be spent on those areas of Gutenberg?
Yeah. It would really simplified a lot of things. It would have given, and I'm just extrapolating based off of what could have been, but if Fields API was part of WordPress core and Gutenberg could utilize it, it could have utilized it for the block structure so that you could register all of your blocks and all the controls for the blocks inside of PHP and as part of WordPress itself. And then JavaScript would then pull that information and be able to utilize it to build out all of the interfaces. So we wouldn't be having all these discussions about, well, Gutenberg's so hard to implement because I have to learn all this React stuff or all this JavaScript stuff. And it would be more conversations about, wow, this is really a lot easier than I thought it would be. What would have been, and we didn't get quite that outcome. And I keep, I feel upset in many ways because I wasn't able to get Fields API into core, but also I've come to accept that it's not entirely my fault. I believe that there are many developers inside of WordPress core who have contributed and who are kind of the people who make the decisions and push towards things. There wasn't a whole lot of internal push for the Fields API. So they obviously Fields API would have been a big far-reaching thing for WordPress, but it's also maybe it was too big for people to be like, well, I don't see that happening in this release, so I'm going to focus on this thing. And so people kept pushing it off. We tried to do Fields API before REST API, and REST API was being developed and finally released, but there could have been some really cool things that we could have been able to utilize as part of REST API out of the gate if we had Fields API.
And if we look at the Fields API, it's, as we said, it messes with the data layer, the foundation of WordPress. It touches a lot of areas of WordPress. And you said it was like working on a giant patch for WordPress, working on a giant patch for a piece of software that at the time was having a major new version pushed out every 3 to 4 months. So, the Fields API was one of those projects where, it's long term, it's visionary. You got to think about the long term and stretch goals and trying to get people to maintain interest and contributions. But a lot of the core developers were working on that next 3 to 4 month release as part of the cycle. So that probably didn't help for the Fields API project as well.
It reminded me a lot of Donica with multi-site. Like every time that you would put a huge effort into the Fields API and maintaining a patch and maintaining updates to what it was that you guys were working on, you would really have to kind of live merge in all of the changes that were happening to the rest of WordPress core, as your patch would become stale with every other different change that would happen, because it touches so many pieces of the code, and pieces that, to be frank, are sort of incomplete as they are anyways, like the settings API or the register meta API. These are things that are fleshed out and are in use in some places, but they're not used everywhere. And so to try and take on a Fields API to give everyone all of the knobs, controls, and switches to talk back and forth to all of these places where data is intercepted and manipulated in WordPress core, to do that live in between WordPress versions without a lot of consideration for the noise is a lot of rework. Basically, most of your job, I guess, is reworking the existing concepts and code that you've worked on to make it retrofit for every new version of WordPress that came out every 3 months, or even for minors that have changes to other things too. So it's just it reminded me a lot of watching the multi-site merge happen, where it's one person alone largely working on something and then going, well, time to pull all this back in. And then you just step through a million conflicts and then keep going the direction that you're going until it's time to merge everything back in again. It's kind of a frustrating, sort of alone, sort of thankless kind of thing. So I imagine that through the years of working on the Fields API, can you talk a little bit about just the feeling of a long-term project and trying to get support and trying to be the champion of it, and then not having it go the direction that you wanted it to?
Yeah. Well, continuing on from what I was saying, it goes right into that. Basically, I began to work at 10up and we put tons of time into it. And I was thinking to myself, how can I make this be successful? And I thought, hey, what if I copied an existing API? And this is after some feedback from our initial code that we put up. We basically scrapped it all and started a whole new Fields API prototype based off the Customizer API. I was like, hey, everyone likes Customizer right now. What if I fork the Customizer and make it a Fields API, and then the Customizer can use the Fields API too? And I was like, wow, this is cool. And then I got to do it, and I actually built all the integrations. We at some point had user profile, comment editing, term field. Well, not for terms, because terms didn't have meta fields, but we had the term screen. We had term add new. We had post editor. We had the Customizer and all these different areas, all those different screens running off the Fields API, not just for the custom fields, but for the core fields too. So like if you're on the user profile screen, you see that there's, user password and all these different fields and stuff. That was all running off the Fields API, including the settings API. We had the settings API even integrated with the Fields API.
What I love about that the most, and I don't know if you remember or not, but I remember at least one of the very first conversations that I think that we had with each other in IRC back in the day was you had ported a bunch of bbPress stuff to use pods. Yeah. And it was custom bbPress tables, everything. And you were like, hey, take a look at this. Yeah, check this out. I've got all this bbPress stuff in WordPress using pods with bbPress just bolted on top of it. And I was like, well, how did you get that. Okay, magic. I don't know, but it was really cool to see that you have a ton of experience going back a really long time, taking other people's code and projects and just bridging it to a different underlying API, making those things work. And so it doesn't surprise me that that was something that you were able to do quickly, because I've seen you do it quickly with pods multiple times. But the first time with bbPress really was interesting, because it was like, wow, there is so much that we would be able to do so much more quickly if we had all of this kind of baked in support. And not having it really hinders a lot of forward motion with dashboard screens, plugins, every part of it. So that was the first time that I remember seeing what you were able to do with even just with pods, let alone the Fields API.
Yeah. That whole process of building all these different things for WordPress core with the Fields API was pretty tough, but it got right back into the patching issues, like you were mentioning before, where I built all these integrations, and of course a release comes out, and now I have to go through and change all of the things I've put in there, and so I approached it as like a big giant patch. But what I should have probably done to start out with was a plugin on its own. It doesn't modify any core files, and I would force core developers to enable these hooks that I need to be able to do what I'm doing somehow. But there was a lot of people saying, well, this would have to be a hook that you would commit before the releases. When the release starts, and then before it is released, we have to take this hook out because it's only for development. And so there's little gotcha moments where you can't like leverage those things very easily. It's tricky, because then you have to have people running on beta versions of WordPress, and you can't really do it like a Gutenberg plugin is able to do, where it's built off of WordPress because it's got the hooks it needs.
Right.
So I was facing a lot of that. So it was just a big giant patch with all these files changing, and I got so burnt out just trying to keep up with all those patches every time there was a release. I burnt a bunch of hours just doing that each release, and it was a lot of effort. And I felt like, well, okay, cool. So I got this all this stuff here for them. Let's see if they like it. And it was like sending it into the ether. I would get a little bit of feedback saying, oh, this looks cool. But no one does an in-depth look at the code. No one goes through and says, oh, hey, yeah, let's push this through. Let's make this go into core. Like, put it as a release thing here now. And I kept pushing and pushing and trying to do my best. But I don't know if it's because I'm a developer more than I am a politician, but I just wasn't able to get the forward motion for getting the feature itself evangelized enough, as much as the code itself deserved.
So I we've commiserated before, and I think you and I share a similar experience with Pods API, the Fields API, the BBs, and things like that. And I think one of the things that I have thought about in retrospect is that a lot of the people that I was hoping would care or help with BuddyPress or bbPress were never going to. And for some reason, I had kind of targeted them as like, man, it would be really great if we had some core talent come this direction. But they're not going to go backwards. To them, that is not a lateral move. It's not an upward move for them. That is they have achieved greatness with WordPress core. They're not going to work on BuddyPress or bbPress or on a different project. The natural workflow is, you find BuddyPress and bbPress, it's real easy to contribute. We're thankful to have help. And then once they're trained and ready, then they move upwards into WordPress core and then move on to what is, kind of bigger and better things. And so that's one of the things I think that if I had time to, or for other contributors to the BBs, that I would like to see, is to champion the other direction towards other forum users, some vBulletin contributors, PHP BB contributors, not to poach folks, but to be able to say, like, we have these other things that might be interesting for you, and to try and get others from outside of the community to come in. And I thought about that with the Fields API a little bit, is that it's not uncommon for other projects to have these things. Django or Drupal or they have layers for this that are is super helpful for spinning up and getting projects off of the ground real quickly, and the people that you would hope that we're going to have your back. Like, I've got your back, but I don't have time to help you. Whereas these people might already have experience and time to have gotten other things off the ground. But that was a little bit of like what I had learned from it. So I don't know what your thoughts are, or what you could have done differently, or if there was anything. Because you blame yourself for a long time about being the champion for this cause, and you're not really, you don't feel like you're necessarily getting real far. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? What do you think you learned?
Well, I learned that it's tough because I spent so much time and put so much effort and put my name on the line, and I neglected so many other things. It was a personal project, as a personal passion on the side, as well as time inside of the company. Like at 10up, I spent time inside and outside of work hours working on this to push it forward. At WebDev, the same way. And just to see all of my efforts kind of not really able to be pushed over the finish line is a little frustrating, as well as not being able to find enough belief by core developers. And that's it's tricky because there's developers who are contributing to core who are sponsored through their companies, through other companies, to work on stuff. And I think it's an indicator that things like the Fields API wasn't a focus because it wasn't introducing a new user-facing feature. And it wasn't like, oh, this new shiny thing. It was for developers, but not just for developers. If you had looked into the solution and looked into like foresight of everything that we're trying to go for, you could have realized that this would have made things so much easier for all the different features we've been implementing this whole time. So it's tricky because I know that WordPress core developers are specifically focused on things that will get them and the companies they're associated with what they want. WordPress.com has its own needs, automatic through all that stuff. WebDev Studios, 10up, every company that puts time into WordPress core has their own specific needs and what they want to see, what they're doing for their clients and projects. So I'm just very surprised that companies just didn't buy into it, and not just with time and interest, but and saying, yes, we would love to use this if it was there, but more so like, here is 5-10 hours of our time. How can we help you every week? How can we keep this going until it's out the door? We just didn't get that kind of backing.
So as part of your announcement of stepping down from the project leader of the Fields API project, you said something that just this one line here, really sort of sent shockwaves to me, and I think for a lot of other people. But you say, after hundreds of hours of your time, I no longer believe I can affect change within WordPress core. And that's after years of doing what you can, hanging out on WordPress dev chats, going to WordCamps, trying to champion the issue and trying to explain how important and how vital something like a Fields API is to WordPress's future. And you finally reached a point where it's like, okay, I feel like I've done as much as I can. And by continuing to go on with WordPress core and not getting that core buy-in and not getting a bunch of people on board with this, your time may be better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, that's it was when I wrote that line, actually, I thought to myself, wow, that was a big line. And there's a lot to unload from the line. There's myself not believing that I can make this thing happen right now, at least. For the past 5 months, I haven't really been able to do much with Fields API core itself. Like, I just haven't put any time into doing it because I've burnt out months and months and years ago, really, just doing all this stuff to get it to the point where it looks good and has people giving feedback, and then just kind of being the one that is responsible for everything is just a lot of pressure. And when I was at 10up, we hit that hard stop. Like, okay, we spent
Right.
all the hours. What do we have? And I was like, I don't have anything.
Man.
And at that point, like I started working on it in my personal time as a whole, and really, I don't have the money to go out to all these WordCamps. Agencies now aren't really paying people to go out to WordCamps if they're not speaking, and even if they are speaking, it's they can only go to a certain number per year. They want to like make sure they reach their audiences, and if you go, you have to make sure you wear their gear, and it's all sorts of weird hoops you have to jump around, and it's frustrating because if I had the money, I could go to all the WordCamps and evangelize Fields API like crazy with all the people that are making WordPress happen and all the users that would use WordPress and all the developers who develop for WordPress. I would be there representing it at every WordCamp that I could. I would go to all the community summits every year or two, go to the WordCamp Europe, go over there and do that stuff. WordCamp US, like just
you would have
do
made
all
it so
these
that
different things.
we hear about Fields API more than we hear about Gutenberg.
So, but I think that isn't, again, I don't think that would have been the right thing to do anyways. Like going to WordCamps and telling everybody about it, they're the wrong audience, I think, for evangelizing a Fields API. The thing to do is to get.
I think it depends on which WordCamp. Like if you go to home WordCamps of specific contributors, like if you go to WordCamp New York or anywhere in the Mideast or whatever. I don't know what you call it, Mid-Atlantic area. There's
Right.
a lot of WordCamps over there and WordPress meetups that are active and have contributions from people that are part of WordPress core efforts, like that have dedicated time. So those would be the ones I was referring to.
But what Gutenberg is going to prove, right, is that you can kind of build a solution that comes with like so many other problems that you've built an economy out of Gutenberg blocks out in the world. Like you've solved some publishing problem, but as a result of this new thing that you've built, Gutenberg will create blocks and there will be themes and a whole other ecosystem of things will happen. And that's something that Gutenberg has that the Fields API doesn't immediately have to people, because anyone that would use the Fields API would already be using CMB2 or one of the other 10,000 frameworks that there are. I would argue that you could remotely have back channel conversations with the authors of these 10,000 plugins and go, hey, why don't you try bolting yours on top of this instead? You've got yours, we've got this. Make yours speak this language. Here, I've even ported it for you. Here's a pull request on GitHub where we've taken all of CMB2.
Which is the language that core devs are using with Gutenberg for page builders.
It is exactly right. And so if you flip it the other direction and go, okay, well, I won't travel, but instead we'll get buy-in from all of these other Fields managers to use to bolt their UI on top of this API underneath it and get buy-in from the other direction, that you have now kind of shown the world that the Fields API is the canonical thing that everyone should be using. And the frustration that you would have, or at least experience that you would have from WebDev or 10up or any of the places, or Modern Tribe, is if they're not 100% on board with pushing the thing that you're building with every project. Like the folks at Human Made, they try to use the REST API with every project that they're building, and because they are invested and believe in the REST API, they have momentum, and then the REST API sort of has a promise that once it's in core, it will continue to have some attention or whatever pushed towards it. That there's opportunity to completely get buy-in from not core developers, from not anybody else, but get buy-in from the companies you work for, and then the other people that this project would influence, where that was sort of the other thing that we were able to do with bbPress, is if we need forums for the international forums on WordPress.org, we need bbPress to be easy for people to code, easy to understand, post types, taxonomies. It's a simple port. And so we got buy-in from metateam.org, other people. I think you could probably get buy-in from everyone else, and then hopefully let all of those people influence core for you, just by having the back channel conversations. Maybe not.
I did do some amount of it. We had reached out to a lot of the developers to get their like, hey, are you in on this? Like, if this keeps going forward, would you get behind us on this? And a lot of people were interested in it. Some people weren't very interested in spending any time to explore it. I built some integrations where I made an example UI for a Fields manager using the Fields API. It used the Fields API to generate the UI as well as the API itself to handle its fields for the configurations, and it was pretty cool. But like if I went through and tried to add those things to things like ACF, to CMB2, I have experience with many of these plugins, developing with them for projects as well as contributing to some. And I've noticed that implementing something like the Fields API is really time intensive, because you have to make sure that there's backwards compatibility maintained, because people have built these custom field types for all these different plugins, and there's a lot of different things that the Fields API doesn't do, because the Fields API was like we're gonna get the most popular use cases here, the very standard things, the specific field types that we need for most common use cases, and we'll put this into the Fields API. And then so ACF has all these other ones, and CMB2 has some different ways, and then there's the whole issue of how do we even do repeaters, because there is no
how do you standardize the Wild West?
Yeah,
right.
And then where does the Fields API stop at just PHP? Because now we have repeaters and we need JavaScript. And
right.
How do we approach this? What's the best way? And so we had a lot of issues we had to answer as part of that process. And I wasn't able to spend enough time individually with each of those plugins to try to get a solution built that would integrate with it. But I did reach out to a bunch of them, and a lot of them, or everyone I asked, was very interested in utilizing it. It's just a matter of, well, is this actually in core yet, or is it going to be an official thing? Because we're not going to spend any time looking at it beyond that, like saying yes, or like a Fields API theoretically.
Right. It's also it's a timing issue too, right? Like if the Fields API were a priority 7 years ago, it would have been hot, because the metadata, the meta box for custom fields, things like that were kind of, well, I guess 9 years ago. It would have been obvious to have had a field manager back then. But now that everyone is completely really running away from PHP and towards JavaScript and Gutenberg blocks, that it's kind of poor timing for the Fields API too, which is kind of sad, because the need is 100% real. Like anyone who's ever had to write or make their own WP admin screen for any reason, it instantly goes, this should be so much easier. Why is this not easier by now? And a Fields API makes that happen. So it's a timing thing too.
And it's kind of one of the things, the gotchas about Gutenberg is now, instead of like registering at things at PHP level, which gives access to the REST API and Gutenberg and all sorts of different things, you've got it all locked in to the JavaScript. So you've got your blocks registered, maybe through PHP, maybe through JavaScript, and then you have all your controls and all the metadata information about what that block is, the settings for it, all this stuff. This is all locked into the JavaScript, the React templating, and now you can't grab that and just say, I want to build a new Gutenberg prototype. Like you have to make it so it's completely compatible with that JavaScript side. You can't explore new options because it's now locked in, because it's not abstracted.
Right.
There's so little abstraction in Gutenberg that it makes it very difficult to say, if this goes in the core, it's going to be easy to manipulate it and change it and later and implement it elsewhere. It's so difficult because everything has to be so custom.
Right.
So let's go back to the 2017 WordCamp US State of the Word question and answer session. There's Scott Kingsley Clark ready with his question. And what do you ask, Matt? Do you believe that the Fields API I believe I can't remember the exact question off the top of my head, but do you believe the Fields API is important for WordPress, something to that effect, or do you believe that Gutenberg will fill most of the use cases that a Fields API would allow in WordPress? And Matt's answer was that he believes that Gutenberg will probably fill or take care of most of the use cases that a Fields API would have, but that a Fields API would still probably be warranted a WordPress core, and it'd still be important to have. And, we're almost a year, 3/4 of the way towards WordCamp US 2018, and Gutenberg has seen a lot of development between then and now. And maybe if you've taken a look at it recently or worked with Gutenberg, do you see Gutenberg right now taking care of most of the use cases of maybe what a Fields API would offer?
Well, so I wrote that question in on my phone, and I was reading it and trying to make sure I said it like really professionally, and I was like all nervous because I'm like speaking to hundreds of people.
I get it.
But I'll read my question real quick, then I'll explain Matt's answer, and then I will say where we're at now.
Okay.
So my question was, do you think that a potential Fields API could be just as important as the REST API to developers needing to manipulate fields throughout the more than six screen interfaces throughout WordPress? Or do you think that the Gutenberg project will negate the need for a Fields API in most areas of WordPress? And so, like you said, Matt answered and said, I think that Gutenberg will be doing lots of great things. It'll make the need for Fields API reduced, and we won't have to need it as much, but I think there's still some use cases where Fields API could be useful. And so my take on this where we're at now is I don't think Gutenberg takes over ownership of what Fields API could have done. There's very little PHP side of this Gutenberg integration process that they've thought of, like plugin developers abstracting things further. So a lot of this stuff still has to be done in a custom way, and we're back into the settings API issue where we have a new API. It might not be a whole API that could be used to do a bunch of really cool things and used everywhere. It might just be on the post screen, or it might just be on this screen, and so we're going to end up having a bunch of custom implementations of it, and it's not abstracted enough. It needs to be more abstracted, like a Fields API could properly do. And even with register meta, which is a function inside of WordPress core that lets you register your meta keys for a specific post type or taxonomy, and have it appear inside of the REST API and do some cooler things. That abstraction isn't enough still, because it doesn't define the core structure of WordPress content types themselves. It doesn't define the custom fields in a way that could be applied to other types of objects, not just meta specific. It's not enough. It needs that abstraction. And I personally am all about abstraction. I love abstraction because it's just so exciting, because when you abstract, you actually reduce your code and you clean up your use cases, and you start to think about how people can integrate and do more things in without the Fields API. It's been a big problem for Gutenberg, because as we've all seen, there's not been enough PHP side of this to make it so you can reuse a lot of these things much more easily.
The patterns haven't really emerged. The naming hasn't emerged. It is still just kind of piecemeal all over the place. And the Fields API gives everyone that common language in those patterns. I agree.
And I'm having to build a block API for pods, and I shouldn't have to do that.
That's right. That's right. I agree.
Man, so this, and there are people who have worked with you that know this about the Fields API and how beneficial it would be, and then we have Gutenberg, and I could just sort of put myself in your place and just sit back and scratch my head in frustration as to here's a way, here's a direction we could go that would make things beyond it easier. But no, we're going to go to get to C. We're going to go from A to C. We're going to go to D, E, F, G, then come back to B, and then go to C. So, however that makes sense. But I could sense your frustration, and man, it's just, I don't know, man. It's got to be tough for you, because sometimes sometimes WordPress contributions is described as meritocracy, or that decisions are made by those who show up. And this seems to be the ultimate example of no, that's not how it always works.
Yeah, I as much as I want to, I can't do everything for the Fields API. Well, especially because I didn't have enough time at the time, but I couldn't really evangelize the feature in every dev core chat. I couldn't prioritize it as a feature like, hey, this is important too. This really needs to get into something. We have a release chat where we're talking about what can go into a release. And I'm like, hey, Fields API would be really cool. We've made a lot of progress. And there's like silence. I mean, obviously not entire silence. Some people are like, yeah, I believe this too. But them, just like me, we didn't have that ability to prioritize it for the project itself, even if our voices were there.
So I know Matt said that don't expect it to be, because Fields API was not a core focus of this year. So he said don't expect it to be, to have a bunch of work done on it because of Gutenberg, customizer, the editor, and whatnot. So do you think maybe in 2019 or at some point here in the near future, I'd say within the next year or two, that maybe the Fields API will show up as being a core focus, and now Matt just has a bunch of automaticians just chipping away at it like he has Gutenberg, and now the core API or the Fields API becomes a thing?
Well, I personally don't mind how it gets done or who does it, but feel free to spend as much time and effort on it as a company or as individuals. I would really like to see it. I personally had to make that decision to say, I can't do this on my own, and there's no way I can move forward unless I put out that cry for help. Like, I can't do this on my own. I have to step down. I will help you build something really cool, but I need someone alongside me that can evangelize it as much as I do. And it's impossible for me to do on my own, as it's just such a big scope of a project. And it really needs someone who is a seasoned core developer to say, this is my ticket. I'm going to take this. I'm going to start helping you make this happen. And I will spend as much time as they do. If that's if they spend 100 hours, I'll spend 100 more hours. Sure. In my personal time, I'll do whatever it takes. But the thing is, I can't do 100 hours on my own and be in the same position again. Like
I have a different answer too. I think the answer is no, right? Like the answer is the Fields API won't be a priority for another 10 years because it's plumbing. It's such it won't be a priority for anyone until a pipe bursts. It's an emergency to fix these fields, the way that meta's registered, the way that fields are made visible, the way customizer fields, the Gutenberg fields. Someone's going to look at this and go, we are encumbered with field implementations. And boy, wouldn't it be great if, and it'll take everyone to get around to that point before it's a priority, I think is the real answer.
And at the end, Scott will be smoking a cigar saying, I told y'all so.
Sure, but that's the other problem, right? Is saying I told you so is easy, is the terrible part, right? Like that's the way that everybody looks at it. And I run into this with municipal stuff where I could say, look, man, this is what's going to happen if we do this. This is what's going to happen if we do this. This is what's going to happen if we do this. Then we do it. And then it happens. And I go, guys, I have been saying this the entire time. And then everyone's answer is, well, why didn't you stop us? Well, like you just can't ever win those kind of arguments or conversations. You just have to wait for everyone else to come around on their own time. That's what made the movie Inception not a completely terrible movie, is the concept of getting the idea to be somebody else's. And it won't be theirs until they experience how painful it is to rebuild multiple Gutenberg fields and customizer fields and admin screen fields and go, oh, yeah, I get it now. Let's do something about it. And the group of people won't fully get there for a couple of years, I don't think. I think it's going to take some time.
So, Scott,
Yeah,
I know
I
you.
have
I
no
know
idea.
you stepped. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I have no idea how long it may take. Perfect world, I'd love it to happen as soon as Gutenberg's out and they rip out a bunch of stuff in Gutenberg or apply Fields API to Gutenberg so Gutenberg can see the Fields API configurations or whatever. But I would love to see it. But yeah, like I was saying, and like you were saying, it is plumbing. The problem is as a feature, it was so hard to push it forward because it wasn't a forward-facing feature. It was part of the code. It doesn't really change anything other than to say it's more now standardized, and plugin developers can build things, better things, on the ground where we just built. And right now they're having to go through the tunnels to get around all the issues that there are, and it just would be so much nicer if we built a nice bridge for them, and it's a problem because it's not a fancy bridge that people can just drive a car on. You have to walk on it, and you have to be someone who knows where the bridge is.
And one of the things that so other friend of the show, Gary Pendergast, on his blog Pento.net, recently published, and Gary is a Gut core lead developer and a Gutenberg supporter and contributor and all these things. And if you read his most recent blog post from 2 days ago, August 6th. Yep. One of the things that he talks about is design language, concept simplification, platform agnosticism. These are all things that, ironically enough, a Fields API helps with, right? And so you look at brilliant minds that are deep in the core, whose full-time job it is to make these things right. And the feature parity between these two things is still not 100% obvious. And so sometimes you can be playing on the same team and still running in two different directions. And I think that is a shame. It's wasteful. It's somebody ends up going the wrong way, and it's really too bad. But I thought it was funny looking at Gary's post, like, man, this hits home. This hits home pretty hard.
So I know you've announced that you've stepped down. Have you gotten any interest? Has anybody approached you and said, I'm ready to be the next Scott Kingsley Clark and lead the Fields API project?
I've gotten one person, I believe, who was interested in doing something, but I haven't really had a lot of interest in actually saying, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm doing it like now, or I've got this much time. I'm going to actually make this happen. I haven't really seen anything. No one's really been posting the channel, so I assume that people. Like John said, it could just be one of those things where everyone only looks at it whenever it gets to the point where it's enough of a problem.
And there are people, I see it requested all the time. I see people who say, where is the Fields API? WordPress needs a Fields API. Where is it? How come Core is not working on this? And there is some demand there, but there's just not enough pairs of hands, or the right pairs of hands to implement it in the core.
Yeah, I see a lot of comments all the time from people using ACF, pods, types, all these different plugins saying, hey, why isn't this part of core? Like, why do I have to have a plugin? Why can't I could just do it as part of WordPress? This is like such a simple concept to me as a person. I should be able to add new custom fields, or I should be able to add new content types right from the screen. Drupal does it. It's CCK is built into Drupal for years now. So and I know the answer Drupal does it isn't necessarily always the one that everyone wants to look at, but Drupal is a really shining example of how to handle content types and custom fields and tables and even database abstraction. Like, they've got a lot of really cool things that they've done. They've implemented Symfony. They've done a lot of things to reduce their bloat and make it so that they don't have to worry about as many bugs on their side. So
for the past couple of years, Drupal has done a lot of things to please their developers. It's really become a developer's playground, much to the joy of many developers. I see a lot of developers all the time talking about how it's nice to be working with modern things that are implemented in your Drupal. And, it was funny you bring up Drupal, because as you talk about this Fields API, I was going to make a joke and say, boy, this sounds like something Drupal would have already solved by now.
That's right.
Apparently they have.
Well, and fields are something that I was really surprised at how many people built very large, complex projects on advanced custom fields or CMB2 or those things, where fields to me are things that I don't want relying on another plugin. They're so important that they have to work all the time the way that they're designed to work, that trusting a plugin that is not under my influence or control to maintain all of its backwards compatibility 100% the way that WordPress core does seems unrealistic to me for large kind of projects like that. If I'm just building something for myself or a blog for Paul the dog or something, okay, well then it's not a big deal. But to build massive implementations on top of anything other than what WordPress core really is going to provide me with that reliability, it just seems like it seems really risky. And so I'm surprised that there wasn't, and a little disappointed, honestly, that there wasn't more buy-in and more momentum from everyone else to go, yes, this is something that we would love to see, and we are willing to get behind it.
Frustrating.
Yep.
to put it mildly. So before we wrap it up here, I'll ask you one more thing. I know that
I've got one last question too when you're done.
That you want to pass the torch on. I know that you yourself personally have taken on, and this is by choice, you've taken on a lot of responsibility. You've put in a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of trying to get people to get on board with this feature. And now that you've announced that you're sort of stepping back and you would like someone else to come and take over that leadership role. Do you feel a lot of weight lifted off your chest or your shoulders? Like now you're not spending so much time and energy just trying to get people interested in the darn thing, and you can work on other stuff?
It's nice. I can say immediately, as soon as I did it, I felt a lot of relief because I could confront the problem, and I identified the solution, and the solution was to make it known that I can't do this on my own, and that I'm stepping down as the sole responsibility holder. I just felt so much better. Like a cloud just went away, and I could see the sun again. It's often what I think about. If I ever stopped being a programmer, I would love to do like woodworking, furniture stuff, like just like no computers. And to me, I'd be like, wow, that would be so blissful. Like I would just love to just do something totally different. And like passion for me is programming, so obviously that won't happen. But I'm just so into being able to do something and make a change and be able to affect that change. And when I got into WordPress, I saw that being custom fields, and so I got into pods and I've been doing pods is almost 10 years old now in October. That's crazy.
That's crazy.
It was officially the first plugin that did custom post types before there were custom post types.
That's right.
And then we eventually went to tables, and then we came back to custom post types again. And it predates plugins like ACF, which have millions of downloads and active users. But the thing is, it was a solution that did a lot of different, more complicated things that were more developer oriented, and a lot of people just wanted fields. So I've spent time organizing pods camps, word camps. I'm working on a new one, online pod sesh. I've spoken at all these sorts of different places, word camps, pods camps again, WordPress meetups. I've been on Word Sesh a few times. I've been on 11 podcasts, including this is my 7th on WP Weekly. And almost all of these different interactions were to help people do cool stuff with WordPress, whether or not it's me talking about how I went through Kickstarter to build a passion project, how I built, I was working on this pods project, and I think it could help you do this, or how we could do something really cool for WordPress if we did a Fields API. Like all these different interactions are just me spending my own personal time doing these things, and not having to worry about Fields API being one of them, at least for an interim until someone else steps up in maybe a couple of years. Is just at least nice to not have to worry about, like, I need to make progress on this because it's been months and people think that it's gone and it's my fault. But if I step away, it's not my fault. I don't have to feel that burden, and it's so heavy.
So I'll use my question to give you a nice way to tie a bow on the conversation and wrap it up. Is your quote about not being able to influence change in WordPress kind of made me reflect a little bit on time spent and contributing to core and the things that that I enjoy working on, multi-site roles. And
this is what I wanted to hear.
User profiles, all of these things. And, you know, you have good days and bad days and things that you can get buy-in on, and core tickets that are 8 years old, 10 years old. Now you've got all these things that you've kind of whittled together. And there's personality clashes, there's history, there's everything that it's all the things that would happen in a real job if you were there, things that happen with all of your friends that you've known for too many years, people you've hung out with for way too long, and people you haven't hung out with enough. And so it got me thinking about all those things, and that, you know, we've been doing it a long time, 10 years plus, and in any other career or sport, we would probably be retiring. We'd be thinking about what was next, because there's a new class of people that are working in a completely different direction, and that's what's happening now. We're seeing that we're saying, get off my lawn, let's focus on some PHP and some internal plumbing stuff, and this is really important. And everyone else is going, hey man, that's on you. We're working on this other cool thing, and you do you, and we'll be over here. And so that was sort of one, how it influenced me. But two, I'm curious, when you look back on your time in general, how do you feel about it? But also, what are you going to do next?
Oh, that's loaded. Well, first I want to comment on you mentioning people you hadn't hung out with enough. I definitely feel, John, we should have hung out more.
We
don't live very close. But I've always got along super well with you.
Yeah.
You know, and of course, Jeff. But I've seen Jeff at WordCamps for years now, and every time he's just so nice. And I feel bad because
I tried to interview Matt one time at a WordCamp, and there's Scott. Jeff, get away! I need to talk to him about pods.
It happened, but I don't think I was that rude.
No, you were not that rude.
In person, I'm not very able to articulate things.
I stood nearby to listen in on your conversation.
But
you're a journalist after all, Jeff. Your job is to be a fly on the wall.
Don't say the J word, please. Don't.
So the things I think I've enjoyed most over the years have been going to the WordCamps and seeing the people that I know. Even though it's super awkward for me because I'm very much an introvert and I have no idea how to handle a normal conversation with anyone in person.
I can relate.
This story, my wife can attest. 90% of our conversations with other people are her talking and not me, because I listen and I chime in whenever I hear something that I might have something important to say. But I devalued my own thoughts in ideas and stuff to the point where I don't feel like I can chime in enough, and that's imposter syndrome. But it's not just for technology stuff; it's for everything. So it's just weird. But over the time I don't
think it's that weird, by the way. I think it's probably a lot of people.
Yeah. Over the time I spent, I really enjoyed doing a few of the things for WordPress core. I've been in some track tickets here and there, and I've actually had some patches accepted in WordPress core. So I've been a core developer contributor, and that's been nice for a few releases. I still look back at Fields API as a very, very important part of my WordPress career. Even though it hasn't been successful at this point, I feel like I at least took the moral high ground and I built a solution for the problem multiple times. And I feel good about the effort that we did and the people we got along got with us to join us for the whole ride. And I feel that the entire experience for WordPress for me is overall positive. When I get to like where the new kids are doing stuff like Gutenberg and stuff, I like Gutenberg. I think it's a really cool solution. I think we can do some really cool stuff with it. I guess I'm nitpicking. I wish it could be a little bit better. I wish we could have more integration capabilities with something that's a PHP abstraction layer, so we could build some cool things without having to do all the JavaScript, or so I can build a block structure and have an app use it without having to run JavaScript on it. You know, like WordPress.com app could run the fields that you registered for all your custom post types and do all these things with really cool abilities without having to actually run any JavaScript or anything that kind of integrates with Gutenberg itself. It could have done all this sort of stuff much more easily, and that's what I worry about. But overall, I think Gutenberg is pretty great. It gets a lot of flack because a lot of people don't like the change, but as someone who uses WordPress, blocks are better than shortcodes, and you can't get past that point. So
that's right.
That already makes my life better. Integrating with it right now, not so easy, not so great. But I won't specifically say that it's the worst thing to happen to WordPress. Like, I think there's been some other things, but Gutenberg is got a long way to go. I'm hoping that they can see the light and not hold up a whole release for it. I think if we can get it to the point where, it's opt-in for 5.0, not default, that would be great point to start at and get people to use it. And obviously there's a lot of feedback on it, a lot of low stars. So, so I don't want to be a Gutenberg basher. I don't want to be known as someone who doesn't like Gutenberg. I just would like to make it better. Fields API would have made it a whole lot better.
So are you going to make it better?
Well, I'm building a blocks API with pods that will build a PHP abstraction layer. So that's kind of nice. I may approach it in a way that is not pod specific. I might just build my own library to do it and then share that and then implement it in pods. I don't know, because Gutenberg has been going in a lot of different directions and there's a lot of progress being made and things are changing so often. I don't know yet if that's the direction I'll take. Depends when I get into it. But there's a lot of cleanup I want to do. I want to make it possible for people to develop a lot of cool Gutenberg blocks without having to do all this stuff.
Right.
Well, Scott, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. I wanted to have you on because I believe, John, and there's a lot of other people who may be listening to the show and core developers over the years who've gone through the same trials and tribulations as you with pet projects and things. They really believe that will make core better, and they either get shut down or there's no interest, and they put so much time and effort into it. And at the end of the day, it's either a plugin or just another area of WordPress that maybe we'll see some new light on it at a different time or some point in the future. But I really enjoyed having you on and sharing your personal experiences and sharing your thoughts and opinions on what it was like to lead this type of project and deal with the adversity of trying to get core buy-in and trying it to become something a part of core. And John has talked to me about it off air and on air about just some of the difficulties he's had with certain tickets, certain implementations, bringing it up in discussions in core meetings, and either having it be declined or maybe things in context are taken the wrong way. There's all the kinds of that's all open source. That's the nature of open source that you got to deal with. But I, for one, hope that you continue to contribute to WordPress. Good luck with pods, and we're going to have you on for an 8th time in the near future.
I hope so.
I like that he's warning you that there's going to be an 8th time. It's very nice of him to do.
I've always wanted to be part of the 8-timer clubs. I think it'd be really cool. So I would like that.
I wonder how many people I've had on that have been on for 8 times. I don't know. I'd have to do some research. You might be the first. Who knows?
We counted, but I don't remember what my count was. And I think you counted for Gary too. It was 6, I think, for Gary, right? 5 or 6?
5 or 6. But
keep a count.
Any parting words for Scott, John, before we let him out of here?
I just think we should hang out more, man. This is fun. And we should, I don't know, find a way to. I haven't really made much music in a long time, but
that's right.
We should jam on something. I don't know. We'll figure something out.
That'd be cool.
Speaking of jamming on something, give us a couple of party notes before you leave, and tell everybody about how they could follow you and interact with you on social media.
Sure. So if you want my soch, you can see me on Scott K. Clark for Twitter, and I just mainly do Twitter. Facebook I have for private, like family stuff. And then scottkclark.com, and I am on Slack, So Slack is Scott K. Clark with a 0 for the O, and then pods.io for my project for pods.
Why did you need a 0 for the O? Did somebody squat the other name? How did that happen?
Well, it was just, I don't remember why I used a 0. It was because, you're a kid, and you're like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to use a 0. That is basically how it started.
Leak speak.
Yeah, so no one squatted. That was just, I just started using it everywhere.
So tell us the instrument you're about to play for us. So
this is a baritone ukulele. It is a solid body. It's electric, and it's pretty cool. I wish it was possible to get one of these that was like just a baby electric guitar, like real pickups and stuff. This one has like one of the vibration pickups, and it's not as like cool as like the real deal. But it's a cool instrument. I got it made from Ella Uke. I got it years ago, I guess. They had made a limited run, and this one came back, and so I got it for a pretty good deal. And it's been really, really fun to do play with. And I got some other stuff on the wall. I've got a baritone ukulele that's acoustic. I saw that. A guitar, acoustic electric, and then I got a bass back right there. That's my wife's bass. She plays the bass, and
I know a lot of other folks at Modern Tribe play instruments and music and stuff too. So you guys need a jam band together at like a team meetup or something too. Then
we do. And when I was at 10 Up, we actually had a jam band, which at the summits we'd play, and then people would come up and do karaoke to the music.
That's awesome.
So that was pretty cool.
That's cool.
Modern Tribe, we do kind of the same thing. But it's been a lot of fun to see all these different agencies and how many people play music. It's pretty crazy.
So here's what I'm going to do. Since we're already late into the show, we're going to next week, John and I'm going to try and get Gary on the show for next Wednesday because I think it's time, and I really want to dive into the feedback that's going on with Gutenberg, how it's developed, how they're handling the feedback, because there's a lot of things that have to be discussed on what's going on here regarding Gutenberg. So we'll try and have Gary on and get a Gutenberg update next Wednesday. You can follow me on Twitter. You can find show notes for this episode, all other episodes on WBTavern.com. Follow me on Twitter at JFR0. John?
Follow me on Twitter and GitHub at JJJ or JJJ.blog. And so I guess we have Scott play us out, right? We're going to do it live.
Exactly.
And have Scott play us out.
We're doing it live.
All right, Scott, take it away.
Well, this is a T-Rex song. I just found something playful that might be kind of upbeat. Bump and grind, it is good for your mind. You can twist and shout, let it all hang out, but you won't fool the children of the revolution. No, you won't fool the children of the revolution. No. Well, you can tear a plane in the falling rain. I drive a Rolls Royce, 'cause it's good for my voice, but you won't fool the children of the revolution. No, you won't fool the children of the revolution.